If you laugh at people, they'll give you nothing. If you laugh with people, they'll give you everything. He had a company called the Love Company, and Chuck hired a bunch of people that I don't think anybody else would have hired. He had confidence in these marvelous people, by the way. And when you walk into Chuck's office, you know, there's a urinal on the wall, you know, and he was just one of, you know, he was just a eccentric guy. But I have nothing but nice things to say about Chuck Barris, because he wrote probably 3 letters to me while I was doing Newlywed Game. All of it was constructive criticism. He knew exactly what he was doing. He figured out very early that John and Mary Jones are the funniest people in the world. And so when he did Newlywed Game, Dating Game, $1.98 Beauty, and all of that, Gong Show, he took ordinary people and made them stars. He figured it out, man. He was doing reality television back then before we even knew what the word reality meant. He had great instincts, great instincts. And he always favored the dating game, though. We used to have intercompany competitions. We would rate every show from a 1 to a 3. So you'd have a 1, a 1.5, 2, 2.5, and so forth. And we would have 2-week competitions. And Chuck would rate them. He would see the shows. And he always favored the dating game. The dating game was his baby. It was his first one, you know. And that was okay. You know, we were a funnier show, though. The Newlywed Game is interesting. There were a couple of guys named Nicholson and Muir. And they were having lunch, and they wrote on a napkin, husbands predict wives, wives predict husbands. And they gave that napkin to ABC. And ABC gave that napkin to Chuck Barris, and Chuck Barris developed the show. And for years, Nicholson and Muir at the end of the show, you could see developed by, or the idea created by. Newlywed Game and Dating Game and Let's Make a Deal, I believe literally saved ABC. I remember Michael Eisner was the head of West Coast daytime television. He came up to me one time at a party. He says, "You're very important to me." He says, "You're very important to me." Because he realized that these 3 shows, Dating Game, Newlywed Game, and Let's Make a Deal, literally saved the network at the time. And, you know, when they put us on nighttime against the Jackie Gleasons and the Andy Williams and the Flippers, you know, those other shows were costing a lot of money. And we were this little $26,000 show, you see. So we had a major influence upon ABC. And I was extremely upset when ABC did their 50th anniversary and did not invite Lang or myself or Monty to appear. I thought it was short-sightedness, and I was really upset about that, because we saved their butts. Newlywed Game was a comedy show that happened to have a game there. And that's really what it is. You know, nobody talks about, you know, wow, did you see that great prize they won? Or wow, they sure knew each other. No, they only talk about the funny stuff. So it was not a hard game show. I did Card Sharks. Card Sharks was a host's dream, because I had 2 contestants with survey questions, and you could have some fun with them. And then you went over to the board and you played high or lower. And so if you're having a bad day, truly the higher lower would carry the show, you see. So it was a perfect show. Newlywed Game was a tough one, because they would say to me, there's 4 couples that have never been on television before. We want you to go out there and manufacture a half-hour humor. And oh, by the way, your competition is Jackie Gleason, is Laugh-In, is Gunsmoke, is Flipper, you see. And so when we beat them, wow, that was cool, you know, because we were a little $26,000 a week show back then, you see. I'm a conduit between the couples and the audience. And the moment that I think I'm bigger than, I'll give you an example. If you put Bob Eubanks on the marquee of a mall, we'll be here Friday night, you know, 3 people will show up. But if you say Bob Eubanks and the Newlywed Game will be here Friday night, 3,000 people will show up. You see, the whole secret is don't become bigger than the format. Don't become bigger than the couples. The couples are the stars of the show. Nobody tunes in to see me. They just tune in to see what I'm going to do with those funny people. But I was a little stupid, so I didn't know how much pressure was really there. But as time went on, yeah, I felt a lot of pressure. And, you know, I've seen 3 hosts do the show. A very naive young man in 1966, a guy in the 70s that was having some terrible personal problems, and then a guy in the 80s and 90s that pretty much had his act together, and I had a love affair with the couples. But I almost ruined my career in the 70s. I was going through some pretty bad times, and I was too sarcastic. I was too hard. If you laugh at people, they'll give you nothing. If you laugh with people, they'll give you everything. You know, so the whole secret is just to laugh with them, and the more you laugh with them, then they just keep talking and talking. But if you laugh at them and put them down, and that's what I was doing in the 70s, it wasn't pretty. I have learned to extract humor from people. I don't know how, but God gave me that ability. I can't sing, God didn't tune me. So I do have an ability to drag out information and to make things bigger than what they are. There was a psychologist at UCLA that wrote an article once about why people will say the things they say on the Newlywed Game. And his contention was that we all need a place for confession. If you're going to fool around with your wife on an airplane, you have the desire to tell somebody. And I gave them a forum to confess all these funny and wonderful things that go on in their house. Like a guy playing Sink the Submarine in the bathtub, you know, and things like that. First of all, I was in partners with Michael Hill. Michael Hill is the most creative game guy that I've ever met. But the trouble with Michael, he was always so far ahead of the industry. He was doing reality when nobody was doing reality. He just thought ahead. And Michael developed some shows, and I was his partner. We had a company called Hill Eubanks. He was incredibly, incredibly talented. We did the Tony Tennille 1 hour talk variety. We did Buddy Hackett's You Bet Your Life. We did a show called Infatuation. And to show Michael's talent, he saw on Sally Jesse Raphael, he saw a show once where a girl was on and said she had a crush on this guy, and they brought the guy out, and the guy had no idea that she had a crush on him. And well, Michael said, ding, 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 ding. So we developed a show, and it was on the air for 2 years. The Guinness Game, we had an overall deal at 20th Century Fox, and we did the Guinness Game. Then we had an overall deal at Universal, and we did Buddy Hackett and Tony Tennille. So I'm not much of a lover of production because I'm not a very good detail guy, you know. But we were very successful. Yeah, I fought with Sony on this one. And when we did the last incarnation of the show, 96 to 97, 98, right before the show, these sound guys would come in and they'd put microphones up in the dresses and up the coats and all of this. And we, in the room, we had them all ready to go. You know, you get them warmed up in the room. You get them laughing and all of that. You know, at the early days, we served them booze, but we realized we couldn't do that anymore. But, and then you bring them out, and all of a sudden, some guy's sticking his hand up the girl's sweater or the guy's coat or everything, and you just feel them going whoomp like that. So I really didn't want them to mic them because for so many years, I mean, 60s, 70s, and 80s, they had mics right in front of them, you know. But no, they wanted to mic them all, and I just went nuts because all of that warm-up we did in that room just fell to the ground then. But game show people don't understand that. They don't understand that. It's the little bitty things that make it work. Just little things, it really is. Going in and talking to them, you know. But you got to be careful, though, on the other side of that. If you become too friendly with the couples before the show, then they relax. And the last thing in the world I wanted was them to relax. I didn't want them to relax because I wanted them to be a little bit on edge because that's when they say the things that they don't want to say, perhaps, you know. The warm-up guy in the audience is very important. We used to have a warm-up guy named Johnny Jacobs, and Johnny was the best that I've ever seen. He would come to me and he said, "I'm sorry, Bob." He says, "I had them too high," meaning the audience. I had them too high, and they were higher than the format. So he had that feel. So it's a science, man. You know, it's a science. John was perfect at what he did. So the audience has to be warmed up properly. Couples have to be warmed up properly. You know, ask the right questions. I refused to ask about 20% of the questions that they laid in front of me. Because, you know, they put these poor guys in a room, and that's all they did is write newlywed questions. Well, they'd get a little over the top sometimes. And I'd say, "No, I'm not going to say that. You know, no, I'm not going to say that." And every time that I refused or that I backed down and went ahead and asked a question, I was so sorry I did it. You got to be true to yourself, man. You just have to be true to yourself. Okay, that's why people say, "Well, let's just develop a game show." Man, it takes so much effort. It's science and it's you know, knowledge of how to put a game together and how to make it work, how to keep the audience involved. Problem I have with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and Tom Kennedy said it right. You know, first of all, they ran it too many times, and then they put celebrities on. The celebrities were cheating, and that's not what the show was about. But what was so cool about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire is that You could answer a question at home, and you could say, wow, man, I could have won $500,000 because I knew that answer. And you had multiple choice of 4. The problem I have with Deal or No Deal is that, and Howie's wonderful on it, but the show is just luck. And so the audience, if the audience member would say, I'm going to pick number 27, well, he never knows if 27 is going to be shown or not, you see. So the audience can't play along with Deal or No Deal, but you can play along with Millionaire. You could play along with Newlywed Game. And I'd say, where's the strangest place you've ever made whoopee? I could hear America going, hey, Martha, remember we were in the cornfield on top of the Nash that night, I think a successful game show, you have to be able to play along with it. You have to Jeopardy makes you feel smart. If you can answer the final question on Jeopardy, you can walk around, yeah, I could have won that one, But I really think that's important. I really do. Well, Howie's so good, for one thing. And it's John and Mary Jones, everyday people risking the chance of becoming a millionaire. That's perfect. See, I always wanted to do Card Sharks as a $1 million show, because I got to tell you, higher, lower, higher. Okay, if the next card is higher, you win $1 million. What do you think? Higher or lower? See, that's television. And then the whole audience is going, yeah, because this poor little guy, he has a $100 a week job, and you want to see him win, but you don't want to see celebrities do that. They're playing Deal or No Deal, but they know, NBC's smart. They know they're going to run it into the ground, but right now they're riding a ratings crest, and this is what they need right now. You see, it'll go away if they keep running it too many times. But like I say, I think the flaw in the format is that the audience can't play along. But out of it has come I think a brilliant young talent. Howie is a comedian, but he's laid the comedian stuff aside, and he has now said, okay, I am now a host, and he works that format like a fine piano. I think he's really good at it. He's an icon. He just had some interesting characteristics. The Lennon sisters, I ended up managing their career. A fellow by the name of Steve Wolf and myself. Steve was killed. But they went to Welk and they wanted a raise. They were making $187.50 a week apiece, okay, for years. So Lawrence said, well, rather than me give you a raise, why don't you get a manager? And that way you can go out and do other things. So they came to Steve Wolf and myself, and we became the Lennon Sisters manager. And the first thing we asked was, we want a raise. We want $1,000 a week apiece. Now, this was in 1967, I think. Lawrence had the #1 television show on the air, nighttime. He had a $9,000 a week payroll for 40 people. Okay? So we went and we said, we want a raise. We want $1,000 a week apiece for the girls. Well, Lawrence went on the air and said the Lennon sisters want a $4,000 a week. Made it sound like they wanted $4,000 a week apiece. But that wasn't the deal. So ABC didn't want to lose the Lennon sisters. So they came to us and said, look, we'll pay the Lennon sisters $1,000 a week apiece if they'll stay on the Welk show. But they have to work it off. They have to do Hollywood Palace and Andy Williams and some of those other shows. So we said, fine. So, but Lawrence couldn't handle it. He couldn't stand anybody making $1,000 a week apiece on his show, so he let him go. He fired him. And we then negotiated a deal for the girls to do the Lennon Sisters and Jimmy Durante show, which was a nighttime variety show on ABC. But Lawrence, Lawrence, what a talent, what an icon. But he was a little parsimonious. Lawrence had a new cue card guy one night. And at the end of the show, he would always say, good night, everybody, keep a song in your heart. So the new cue card guy, he just wrote out a little thing for Lawrence, and it was the first time he'd worked with him. So Welk says, good night, everybody, keep a song in your heart, and thank you, Mr. Welk, it's been nice working for you. Well, this famous, now a medley of tunes from World War I, that's one of his famous things. He was a character. He was a funny guy. Eddie Winrick Eddie worked for Welk's publishing house. Welk had a very successful publishing. And what Eddie would do is he would take the songs that Welk's company represented and take them to record producers and play them, for him. Well, Eddie just wanted a little tape recorder. So he says, Lawrence, he says, I need to have a tape recorder so I can go out and play these songs. And Welk said, Eddie, my boy, if you can't hum the song and sell it, it's not worth selling. So he wouldn't buy the tape recorder for him. as production values have increased, the regular daytime game show as we know it, unless the format is absolutely wonderful like Family Feud, unless the format is just really outstanding, and unless you can have something clever and funny every 10 minutes, I'm not sure that there is a big thirst. Game Show Network certainly is not setting the world on fire with ratings. Yet it is kind of weird to have 10-year-old kids walk up and say, I watched Card Sharks on Game Show Network, and that's kind of fun. But I think we were, but I'm not sure we are. And once again, it goes back to instant gratification. I don't think the average game show can offer that instant gratification. If you walked into the networks today with Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and said, I've got these two ideas, they wouldn't buy them. Not in a minute would they buy them. Not enough production value. So Jeopardy and Wheel are really living on their older audience, their older demos that have been with them for years and years and years and will slowly go away, you see. I don't know if they're picking up new audience or not. I hope they are, because they're two classic shows. The Newlywed Game was a statement on today's society. It was a microcosm of today's society. I could see how relationships were changing. In the 70s, when we got our guys out of Vietnam, real estate prices started to increase. And in order for a couple to buy a house, both of them had to work. Her salary was no longer just for vacations. Well, when she realized that she had to go to work and that her salary was important for them to exist, she said, wait a minute. Then I want some decisions in other areas of our marriage, sexually, socially, economically. And all of a sudden, men had a partner. And they reacted one of two ways. They either said, wonderful, I have a partner, or they pouted up like big babies and didn't want to accept it. Those were the guys that I had the fun with, by the way, on Newlywed Game. The big pouters, the big babies, So you could see how our educational system was failing or succeeding. You could see how relationships were changing. So it truly was a microcosm of today's society, even though in the department store life I lived in the toy department, for crying out loud. You could really watch what was going on. We were voyeurs. We were looking into the people's bedrooms for the first time, and that was fun. Yeah, Newlywed Game was sort of a pioneer, if you will. I mean, we were the edgy show of our time. I mean, come on, you guys. I had 4 married couples ready to bare their souls for a toaster. We wouldn't even use the term make love. We'd use the term whoopee. But we were the edgy show. We talked about things that nobody had talked about at that time. They had on soap operas. They were talking about, adultery and cocaine and all of that stuff on soap operas. But here were young couples, guys admitting he went to the bowling alley after work rather than coming home, and she didn't know about it. I mean, things like that. So we sort of pioneered this openness, I guess you would say. But we were so benign compared to what you see on television today, so benign. Ford Motor Company and Procter & Gamble would not buy time on our show in the 70s because we were too dirty. Give me a break. I was fortunate in that, they knew I didn't write the questions. The audience knew I didn't write the questions. And it was just that crazy old Bob. Look at him, And I learned from Johnny Carson. I think Johnny Carson was the master, the absolute master. Nobody was better. I learned how to handle ticklish situations with expressions. Johnny could say 1,000 words with one expression. And I used to watch him. And he would give that look, that to the camera. And the audience would say, oh, I know what he's thinking, So he didn't have to say anything. And so I really learned from John. Jack Benny did it too. I'm certainly not in their league. But Benny did it, and then Carson did it, and then I tried to pick up on what they were doing. Well, you know what happened? You know why we came up with the word whoopee? I was with my daughter, Teresa. We were driving down the street, and there was a disc jockey on the air. We were listening. His name was Corky something. And it was a rainy day, and he said on the radio, I get horny when it rains. And my little 10-year-old daughter looked at me and said, what's horny mean? I was so angry at that guy, I wanted to just whack him. I really did. So I made the decision that I wasn't going to use the term make love, even though every soap opera and situation comedy in town was using the term. But I just didn't think you should have to explain that to your children until you're ready to do so. So we came up with the word whoopee, because whoopee could mean having a party, whatever. So Sinatra had the record making whoopee. So that's how that all came down. Because I just didn't feel comfortable with that. I just didn't feel comfortable with it. You see, as long as I didn't get dirty, if the couples went over the line, I'd get mad at them. I said, hey, my show, knock that crap off. I've done that many times. And, I can see the producer just crouching like this, because sometimes guys would try to get cute, well, I'm on TV. But as long as I didn't get dirty, it was okay. I'm just a question answer, I don't write these questions. I'm just writing, and if you gave me a line that was not appropriate, shame on you. I didn't do it. Shame on you. So I kept that middle stance there. I was not known. Now, if I'd have made some dirty comments, like off-color comments and things like that, been different, but I didn't. Here again, I was the conduit between the format and the audience. That's all I was. Well, in the 70s, I know Mike Metzger was producing the show at the time, and I know Chuck said to Mike, let's take it up a notch. And we did, and that was the time I was having some problems, and I thought the shows went a little over the top, a little weird. Michael Hill and I produced a pilot called Smart Alex for NBC. Have you ever had a good idea and have some smart aleck tell you why it won't work? It was kind of like the invention show of today, only this is way back in the 70s. And so we hired this kid named David Letterman to be on a panel, and David didn't have a coat. So we had to buy him a coat, and we didn't have time to have it tailored, so we pinned it in the back, and we put him on the show. And NBC saw the show. It was a cute show, but NBC didn't like the show, but they loved this guy, David Letterman. We then did several run-throughs for shows with David after that. And David could make a lampshade funny. He could make a lampshade funny. I thought his, and this is just my personal opinion, his problem back then is that if the interview or it wasn't going right, that he had a tendency to go for the jugular. And I think that's an inherent comedian thing, And I see him now. If the interview didn't go well for Carson, down the couch. Don't try to save the interview. When Newlywed Game wasn't funny, I learned very early, just get through the darn thing, and go on to the next show. Don't try to save it, because you only dig yourself deeper in. But Letterman is such an incredible talent. When Leno got the show, he kept Freddie, John's producer, Freddie de Cordova, yeah. And Freddie was a consultant, and he, I believe, taught Leno how to do the interviews. How that when you get everything you're going to get from him, move him down the couch, don't try to outstar your guest. Leno learned to listen very quickly, and I think it's paid off for him too. When interviews are not going well, I see David go right for the neck, And I brought up something just then. The whole secret is to listen. If you listen to what the contestant is saying, then go and make something from it. But you see, comedians, here again, not a criticism, this is what they're born with. Comedians are thinking. You can see them thinking for that next funny line, And I sat in a room one time over at the Palladium here with Bob Hope, Red Buttons, Pat O'Brien, and Les Brown. And they were sitting around a corner, we were sitting around in a circle. We were all in this little room. And they were telling jokes. They were taking turns. I never heard a whole joke. Did you hear the one about, yeah, I've heard that one. Okay, Red, your turn. Well, did you hear the one about, yeah, we've heard that one. So they just don't like to laugh at anybody else. They only think they're funny, And here again, without being redundant, it's not a criticism, this is what they're born with. Billy Crystal did a show of ours called All-Star Secrets, yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger did a show. I remember Arnold saying, I said, okay, what is, one of today's celebrities says they're going to be a star. Now, who do you think it is? Well, it was Arnold. Arnold says, I'm going to be a star. And he was, wasn't he? I enjoyed the celebrities. I thought they were fun. There's all kinds of drama going on backstage and things of that sort. But if I had to pick a show to do for the rest of my life, it would have been Card Sharks. Yeah, I did Card Sharks for 5 years, and I had more fun with Card Sharks than any of the shows. It was really great. Oh, Newlywed Game was my love, of course. I raised the kids on it, but nevertheless, Card Sharks was the host's dream show. It had all the elements, the fun with the contestants, the game over here. It had all the elements, and it was fun. I did it for 5 years. I happen to think that people are our most important commodity. I do a pretty funny 1-hour keynote speech, and I speak to corporate America, and it's called It's All About People. And I happen to think that on our deathbed, we're not going to ask for our computer, we're going to ask for the people that love us. and that this whole world is just run by people, and we got to take care of each other. And I think that people are the most important commodity we have, and I'm very concerned that we're losing our people skills in this world of high technology. We're sending emails to people in the next cubicle. What happened to the time where I walk in and say, I got a great idea, what do you think of? And so I just really believe that we've got to be very careful. The other thing I'm very adamant about is that in 2025, 20% of our population will be over the age of 50. But guess what? Those 20%, that 20% will control 80% of the spendable income. 80% of spendable income. So I believe that these television programmers that are programming to these little pimply-faced guys 18 to 25 have better wake up and say, oh, guess where the money is? It's with the people over the age of 50. That's where the money is. I said it, and I'm glad.